welcome to my long-awaited What I Read in November and December, because I didn't post one in December for November, but it doesn't really matter because unfortunately it's not like I read a swat of books any more than usual. So let me get started. The first book I read was called The Promise. It is a book that takes place in South Africa, probably just about the end of apartheid, where white families were, it was like the destruction of the whole political system. So white families that were in power were now losing their power and their property, all of that. And it's about a mom and dad and their three children, their adult children, and they all lived on a farm. And the book starts off with their mother's funeral. And she makes a promise to her housekeeper, and I would imagine she would have been her slave. But the slave woman, her name was Salome, and the mom were very, very, very close. And in the mom's dying months and days, Salome is the only one who took care of her. Her children didn't, her husband didn't. It was Salome. So the mother promised her home and property to Salome when she died. And that would leave the rest of the family without a home, as it were, So it's a very interesting look at the family dynamics and how each one of the children processes all of this. And I didn't like the title that much. Well, I don't want to ruin the story, but the title for me wasn't a strong element of the story. Like the promise to give the home to Salome was not, to me, the driving force around the story, although it was there, but it wasn't like the driving force behind the story. But the story was still really good nonetheless. So it's called The Promise by Damon. I'll post it here because I don't have the book. It was an ebook, and I'll post the name right here. But I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. The title bugged me. And so sometimes I just wish I could just read the book without looking at the title and just follow the story. I wouldn't have called it The Promise, but that's just me. I didn't read the book, you know what I'm saying? But it was still a very good read nonetheless. And again, historical fiction. You learned something. I learned a lot about what happened at the turn of the government with apartheid and how it was in Africa for both the Black community, the Africans, and the Afrikaans. I think Afrikaans is what they speak. I'm not sure. But anyway, for the white community and the Africans. Well, no, that's not right either because they're all Africans. For the white Africans and the Black Africans, how things were changing at the turn of that important moment in history. So again, it's called The Promise. The next book I read, do you remember that book, When I Fell from the Sky, about the lady who fell from the plane and was the only survivor of the plane crash over South America? If you look back on my videos, you'll find it. It was one of the earlier ones. Well, this one was kind of a survival story similar to that, but it wasn't about a plane. It's called Beyond the Bear. Now, Beyond the Bear, I first heard this story. I listened to a podcast called What Was That Like? And he talks to different people that have experienced really odd things that like it's just not normal experiences, things that are quite unusual, often survival stories. It's a really good podcast. And so this man was on the podcast. His name is Dan Bigley. And he was attacked by a mama grizzly bear. And I mean, he was terribly mauled. Let me just show you one of his CAT scans. So here is Dan Bigley Ct Scan. He was, as you can see, it says he was medevaced to Anchorage, Alaska. So you can see what the bear did to him. He's got pretty much no face, no ears, no lips. Like, look at this. Horrible. And how this man not only survived, the inspiration and the courage to just keep going on. And he's now married in Alaska. This is him now. He's married, lives in Alaska, and has 2 children, I believe. But it's just a story of courage and inspiration. And you can see the title, How I Learned to Live and Love Again After Being Blinded by a Bear. It is amazing read. So good. It is, it's his memoir. And he had just recently met his girlfriend. Her name was Amber. So they had, I think, gone on maybe 1 or 2 dates before this took place. And she stuck by him and is now his wife. It's just really a good read. If somebody's going through something or is struggling with something, I think reading this will give them some courage to get through whatever they're going through. So it's called Beyond the Bear by Dan Bigley and Deborah Mckinley. I'm not sure who Deborah Mckinley is, but he was blind, so perhaps she was the one who narrated it. Oh yeah, it says right here. Deborah Mckinley is a freelance writer who is part of the team that won the journalism highest honor for Pulitzer Prize. So she probably helped him write this book, I'm positive. So excellent read. And although it's very tragic and gory in parts, I didn't find the book like, ugh, I couldn't stomach. It's just really, really amazing at the power of survival and strength that we have when we're going through something horrible. We really dig deep, 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 deep. And the desire to live. So Beyond the Bear, Dan Bigley. And again, listen to that podcast if you want to find out more about the story. It's called What Was That Like? And I listened to it on Spotify, but you can find that podcast anywhere. Aren't these gorgeous? You know me and my flowers. I was looking after my grandsons because their mom got COVID. And so they were here for about a week. And so she gave me these gorgeous lilies. And she said, I wish I could smell them. She's better now, but she couldn't smell anything. But anyway, they're beautiful. Okay, so on to my next book. The next book, the only way I can describe this, it's nothing short of delightful, this book. The Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows by John Koenig. And it is more like a dictionary. But let me just, it's beautiful and it kind of makes you smile. And it's, here it says, the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows is a compendium of new words for emotions. Its mission is to shine a light on the fundamental strangeness of being a human being, all the aches, demons, vices, joys, and urges that are haunting in the background of everyday life. So they put a few examples. For example, kenopsia is the atmosphere of a place that is usually bustling with people but is now abandoned and quiet. Kenopsia. Who made of these words? I don't know. Here's another one. Déjà vu, as opposed to déjà vu. It's just déjà vu. The awareness that this moment will be a memory. I mean, notice tolerance. The feeling that the plot of your life doesn't make sense to you anymore. Enouement, the bittersweetness of having arrived here in the future, seeing how things turn out, but unable to tell your past self. That's pretty deep. Onism, the frustration of being stuck in just one body that inhabits only one place at a time. So some of them are really delightful, and some of them are just downright weird. But it still gives you a chuckle. So it's got here, the chapters are all called different things. Like this one. The interior wilderness. And then there's some artwork. Defining who you are from the inside out. And so whatever words are in here, and then it just has a whole bunch of these unusual words and their description. Heart spur, an unexpected surge of emotion in response to a seemingly innocuous trigger. The distinctive squeal of a rusty fence. A key change in an old pop song. The hint of certain perfume, which feels all the more intense because you can't quite pin it down. I have had a heart spur plenty of times, mostly from music. And I'm sure you all have too. Different sounds, but it's neat to be able to put a name to the feeling. And that's what this is. It is just the coolest little book. Would be a wonderful gift, in my opinion. Oh, especially if someone's a bit of a wordsmith, likes to read or write or journal. So it's the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows by John Koenig. I love it. And it's a book that you always keep going, like I read through it the first time, but then you always keep going back to it and keep going back to it because it's just so interesting. And here's one last one. Sonder. The realization that each random passerby is living a life as vivid and as complex as your own, populated with their own ambitions, friends, routines, worries, and inherited craziness. An epic story that continues invisibly around you like an anthill sprawling deep underground, with elaborate passageways to thousands of other lives that you'll never know exist, in which you might appear only once as an extra sipping coffee in the background, as a blur of traffic passing on the highway, as a lighted window at dusk. Sonder. So as you sonder on that, look into this book. It's delightful to me. It's beautiful. Creates beautiful new words that we need, but we do not yet have. That's exactly what it is. So it puts a description to certain feelings. In here somewhere, I'm not sure where it is, it's the feeling that you have when you hear a train whistle in the background. Now, we all have that feeling. I love that feeling. But they give it a word. They call it something. Like normally I would say, oh, I love the sound of hearing a train whistle in the background, especially at night. They call that something. So it's just a neat book, guys. I give it 5 stars just for its uniqueness, its coolness. It's just really, and it would be a wonderful gift. I bought this for me, but I'm glad that I did because I love it. So the last book I'm going to go into, because I started it in December, but I am not finished. But it's one of those that you will probably read forever if you're interested. And it is called 9th Street Women. And you can see I've been reading it, fingerprints all over. And it is the story of these 5 artists: Lee Krasner, Ellen de Kooning, Grace Hartigan, Joan Mitchell, and Helen Frankenthaler. 5 painters at the movement that changed modern art. These women were behind the great modern artists and that we all know, like Jackson Pollock is one of them. He was married to Lee Krasner, and Lee Krasner had some amazing art, but because she stood behind her man and pushed him forward, he's the one we all know about. All of these paintings, that's her there. And it's just such, again, it's history. There is her with Jackson Pollock right there. And they were married. But it got a whole bunch of pictures every so often. But the funny thing is the book is close to 800 pages long. And so you're thinking, oh, yay, the pictures take up a swath of those pages. Oh, no. They continue counting after you get to here. Then they continue. See, that's page 368. So when you're done with all these pictures, you're on page 369. So I chose this book for book club, and our book club meeting is tonight. And I'm not completely done, but it doesn't matter if you're not done. It's a real art history reference book. And look at all the references in the back. Anyone who is interested in art history, or any, like, there is so much other history that's in this book. It started around in the late 30s, early 40s is where the author starts writing. And she talks about the Pearl Harbor bombing. She talks about Hitler and all how it played and how Hitler hated art and wanted it removed and destroyed from Paris. So how this woman named Peggy Guggenheim, you've heard of the Guggenheim Museum, her name was Peggy Guggenheim, how she was very wealthy and she went around Paris with another man and purchased a painting a day and shipped it all to the US. And she was one of the people who saved some amazing works of Gauguin, Picasso, so many paintings. And it kind of, for me, explains why these paintings are worth so much. I mean, obviously they're worth a lot because the art is beautiful and, you understand. Modern art, I have such trouble understanding, but after reading this book, I get it now. I get how the modern artists see things. They're not realists, they're surrealists, and they see things totally different than we do. Unless you're a modern artist or a surrealist or you understand. But they see things in shapes and texture and they and anybody that dabbles in art, loves art, or even creates in any way by writing, music, art, any of those things, understands the madness of an artist. How you can be working on a project and there is no time. You just don't stop. And this group, they were even before beatniks and hippies. They were more bohemians, and how they lived their life and free their free style of living, and how they would be married but have an affair with somebody else and it would be okay, and how the gay community in their community was completely accepted, no questions asked. And remember, this is in the 30s. So they were very, very, very liberal people, which is really cool. They were very cool people. And I just wish I could have known some of those people or gone to a elaborate cocktail party with some of them, just very neat. Very good. So if you have any interest in art or art history, or you know anyone that is studying art or art history, I highly recommend Ninth Street Women. And again, it's the impact that these women had on modern art. I mean, you didn't hear a lot about them because everything was about men back in the day. But these were very strong women in their own right. And they considered themselves, when they were with their group of artists, they were artists. Wasn't male, female. They were artists. This book was written by Mary Gabriel. She did a lot of amazing research on this book, and it's really good reading. Even though it's really long, but I've read long books before. We call these bricks. I've read these before, but it's just history behind it. It's so amazing. I can't believe I picked this book. But there was something about knowing about these 5 artists that had such an impact on modern art, and nobody's really heard of them. There's a movie on Netflix that I just recently watched because of this book called Without Gorky, Gorky, and about his marriage to Agnes Magruder, and it's told by his daughters. It's a documentary, and it's through their daughters' eyes, and they talk about kind of the madness. He was probably the start of the modern art movement in New York, and it's told by the daughters and how they kind of lived through the madness of their dad. But it's very touching and very moving, and you watch it and you're like, wow, this is, even though he's gone, it still was in the 40s, not that long ago. And you hear about these things. I love knowing things I didn't know before. I tell you that time and time again. If I can read a book and learn something at the end of the book that I didn't know at the beginning, excellent book. This is one of those books. And there's so much we don't know. Like, I had no idea the Guggenheim Museum. I knew the name of it, but I didn't know it was named after Peggy Guggenheim. And I didn't know Jackson Pollock thought she was like the worst bitch in the world. So there you go. You know what I mean? So there's just so much knowledge in this one book. So I highly recommend The Ninth Street Women by Mary and Gabriel. So let's review the books. The first one was The Promise. I gave it 4 stars. Great story. Hated the title. The next one was Beyond the Bear by Dan Bigley and Deborah Mckinley. Loved it. 5 stars. So inspirational. So good. Next one, Obscure Sorrows. Loved it. 5 stars. Bedside book. Always there. Reference. Whimsical. Cool. If you ever have a profundity journal or a journal, a profundity journal is a journal where I write down profound things I hear or lyrics in a song or things that move you. Right here. This is amazing. Great gift. All of them are great gifts. And then Ninth Street Women. Phenomenal source of knowledge about the modern art movement in the early 40s and 50s. So that's my review for November and December, and my end of reviews for 2021. Oh, I forgot to say Happy New Year to everybody. I hope everyone is staying safe. This COVID is it's like Russian roulette. You're bound to get it. It's just so scary. My daughter called me this morning. She goes, Mom, I tested positive with COVID. And I'm like, ugh. She's a personal trainer and she's around a lot of athletes. So she says, I'm sure I got it from someone in the group because a lot of them were missing last time she went, and she asked the kids, well, why is so-and-so here? And they're like, oh, they have COVID. Oh, they have COVID. They have COVID. You know. So, yeah, they've gone to now here in our area that they don't even recommend you go get tested. They want to save the test for severely ill people or very compromised people, and so they recommend that you just don't get tested. Just stay home and fight the battle and isolate yourself, and that's just the way it is. So treat it like a flu, especially if you're boosted, vaccinated, and had your booster shot. Those are most likely the odds of you getting severely ill are very slim. I mean, she is sick. She's like coughing up stuff, just like when you have a really bad flu-y cold. Exactly how she is. But I think that's the worst of it. And she said today she's just starting to get kind of achy. But she has run every day, probably, I don't know how far every day, for 600 and some days. And she hasn't stopped running. She runs it, even though she's sick, she goes up getting on that treadmill and she runs a kilometer. So she's just like me. We're so fit. Not. But anyway, I'm just chatting on. Thanks so much for watching my book review. I really appreciate it. And I'm not sure if I'll do it in 2022. Who knows? We'll see. But I did it for this year, for 2021, and I hope you guys really enjoyed it. So hopefully we'll see you soon. Well, you'll see me in my vlogs and my other videos, series, and mixed media and all that. But hopefully I'll be back with more book reviews. We'll see. Okay, bye for now and Happy New Year and stay safe.